You may be aware as a reef keeper that alkalinity is pretty important to keep at the right level and also stable within your reef system. We're all aware of that in a traditional coral-based reef system. But did you know in a macroalgae system it's just as important to keep your alkalinity stable and at a reasonably high level? Well, I did know that, and that's why I invested a little bit of money into a piece of equipment to keep my alkalinity at a reasonably stable level. However, this was one of my first mistakes. Long-term viewers will be very aware of my macroalgae system, particularly this side of it, which is where I do most of my macroalgae cultivation. Now, it was a surprise to me that this system, when growing at full tilt, can actually suck out around 2 to 3 DKH of alkalinity a week. Now that is a lot. It's very, very significant, and keeping it stable has been a bit of a challenge. Now previously, all I was doing was essentially once a week, I was eyeballing about 10 to 20 grams of KH buffer and just chucking the powder directly in my sump. Now, it was okay, that worked sort of, but we'd be getting these spikes up and down of KH, which is not great because you want it to keep stable, which is everybody's dream. Even in a coral-based reef system, you want your alkalinity to be as stable as possible. So what I did is I got one of these. Now these are very simple. Now it is a bit messy and I'll explain why, and that's part of the problem. This is a D&D auto doser. It's just a single unit. It's got one little peristaltic pump on there, and all it does now sucks out my pre-made alkalinity buffer and dumps it into my sump. Now the reason I did that is because I've recently started a new job. I say recently, it's actually almost been a year. Lorry driving. So I'm away for large chunks of the week. I don't have time to actively be in here all the time like I used to, monitor all my alkalinity and everything. So now I'm trying to move away from that and make it more automated, which is fine. It's what a lot of people do. It's brilliant. But what happened was my tube, my outlet here, actually went under the water like that. And I didn't actually check it because I assumed everything was going to be fine, everything was working, and it worked like that for a good couple of weeks. I was measuring my alkalinity and it all was, you know, ticking over nicely. The amount I was adding was combating the loss from the growth of the macroalgae, and then I just thought, well, as long as I keep that topped up, everything's going to be a-okay. Well, this is where the problem started, because what happened is, as that tube was underwater, as the alkalinity buffer was hitting the salt water, I'm guessing something was precipitating within the tube, and I can assume it's calcium was precipitating in the tube, and eventually the tube blocked up. I didn't notice. And what happened was, because of the back pressure, the pipe blew off from this little connector, from the pipe here to this bit of airline. That bit of pipe blew off because of the back pressure, and you can see the results. This is all alkalinity buffer that was basically dosing from my bottle straight down my wall for at least 4 weeks, and I didn't notice. I just assumed it was right. I came in, I checked that the tub was full. In the 10 minutes that I got to come in here, I was like, yeah, it's full, and I was out the door again. Didn't even once check that. And obviously that was a problem, because when I finally noticed, just before Christmas, well, my DKH of this system was almost lower than 5, which is a bit of an issue. And the major issue is, I've now got a bit of a hair algae situation. It's all kind of linked in to each other. There's a few things at play that has caused a bit of a bad feedback loop. The first thing was, because my alkalinity dropped so much, all the coralline algae started to die off. I guess it's just like normal coral. They need that availability of alkalinity to lay down their skeleton, and it all started to die off. So because it all started to die off, that dead coralline algae layer was a great trap for sediment. So you can see here, there's lots of sediment attached to that bit of coralline algae. And when the sediment started to accumulate, the hair algae started to settle on the sediment, on the dead coralline algae, and then we have a hair algae problem. Now, hair algae is very tolerant of bad conditions. So even at low alkalinity, the hair algae thought, well, this is great, there's no more competition, the coralline algae has died, or is dying, so now I can grow. And that's basically what has happened in most of my tubs. Oddly enough, this last tub here hasn't really been affected. It stayed pretty much how it was before my alkalinity crashed. And this is how all of my tubs were. Completely covered in coralline algae and looking great. Unfortunately, the rest of them have this hair algae issue. The other problem is my macroalgae stopped growing. So you may be surprised to know that macroalgae actually uses alkalinity, the bicarbonate, to get its inorganic carbon for its growth. So during photosynthesis, it will use that the same way that terrestrial plants use CO2. Macroalgae, for the most part, uses bicarbonate. Now, I have read a few studies, and macroalgae can and does use dissolved CO2 as well. But for the most part, it is in fact bicarbonate, which is why, in addition to the coralline algae growing, which as you can see, it's just dead at the back there, isn't it? You can see it's all gone white, and there's even a bit of hair algae growing there. So it basically couldn't photosynthesize. The macroalgae was having a hard time of it. And yeah, it's a bit of a feedback loop, because then the macroalgae is not growing, and again the hair algae thinks, wow, this is brilliant. No competition for the nutrients. Let's grow. So I have come to the realization that alkalinity is pretty important for your macroalgae, and I was aware of it before. It was something that I was actively dosing, but I didn't realize how significant and important it was, because it's just something that I've been not ignoring but not really actively investigating. But yes, you must keep your alkalinity stable. It doesn't even need to be at natural seawater. You can have your alkalinity quite high. I've run these systems, when I sort of tried to correct it, it ran all the way up to like 13, and there was no adverse effects on the macroalgae. It's when it gets too low, that's when the problems start. But we can see some recovery. If we look at this little rack here, we have the signs of bright pink coralline algae. So I think we are in recovery. We are at that point where I've just noticed it just in time before we have a complete system crash. But we were very, very, very close to losing this entire macroalgae system, I think, because I haven't got any footage of it, but all the macroalgae went very pale. This Botrocladia was basically see-through. We can sort of see it in this tank. If you look at this Cryptonemia, how white and unhealthy it looks where it's right under this light. Well, everything was like that, and at first I thought it was a nutrient issue, so of course I dosed nutrients. I thought it was maybe an iron deficiency or whatever, and then I quickly realised that this was just spraying my alkalinity solution everywhere, and that's the issue. So, lesson learnt. But what this has actually led me onto is the mass cultivation of macroalgae. A few people have done experiments on actually dosing CO2 into cultivation tubs for macroalgae, and according to them, the addition of CO2 can give you about an 8 to 10% increase in growth, in yield. Because of course macroalgae can also use dissolved CO2, which is really important for the increase of CO2 in the oceans due to extra carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So it's all very relevant. So I think what this might actually end up doing is inspiring me to get hold of some sort of CO2 doser, and we might do a little bit of an experiment on this system. Probably I might hook up a CO2 system and see how it affects it. Now I have read that macroalgae, or at least the species that have been tested, can choose to use, I say choose, it's a biological thing, but they can switch between using dissolved CO2 and bicarbonate. So as I raise the CO2 levels, or dissolved CO2 levels in the tanks, we might find that my DKH doesn't drop as quickly because they switch over. So it's all a very interesting line of investigation. But there we go. What do you think about that? That just shows you, don't put too much trust in your equipment, and also you need to maybe check it once in a while to make sure it is working, because lesson learned, I almost lost my entire system. So thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, leave a like and subscribe, and once again, happy fish keeping!